Mummies are often associated with ancient Egypt, where they were created as part of the burial process for pharaohs and other high-ranking individuals. However, mummies have also been found in other cultures around the world, including the Inca and Chinchorro cultures in South America, the Tarim Basin in China, and various regions of Europe. Today, mummies are important artifacts for studying the cultures and civilizations of the past. Through examining the bodies and their associated artifacts, researchers can gain insight into the lives, beliefs, and practices of ancient people. Meet the 500-year-old well-preserved mummified Inca children found near the summit of Llullaillaco stratovolcano on the Argentina-Chile border. On March 16, 1999, an archaeological team led by Johann Reinhard discovered 3 mummified children on top of a 20,000-foot volcano in South America. The children were sacrificed in an Inca religious ritual that took place around the year 1500. This ritual is called Capacocha. It was an important sacrificial rite among the Inca that typically involved the sacrifice of children. Children of both sexes were selected from across the Inca Empire for sacrifice in Capacocha ceremonies, which were performed at important shrines distributed across the empire. 3 mummified bodies were found at the Llullaillaco burial site. 13-year-old Llullaillaco maiden, or also known as the Maiden of Llullaillaco, and her younger companions Llullaillaco boy and Lightning girl. The Maiden of Llullaillaco wore a dress with her hair elaborately braided, along with a feather-adorned headdress. It is believed that she was an Akla, or Sun Virgin, chosen and sanctified at around the age of 10 years, to live with other girls and women who would become royal wives, priestesses, and sacrifices. The practice of the ritual sacrifice was intended to ensure health, rich harvests, and favorable weather. It is believed that the maiden died in her sleep. The Lightning Girl was approximately 6 years old when she was sacrificed. Her body was wrapped in a blanket, embroidered in red and yellow. She was wearing a traditional light brown dress, and her head, along with part of her body, was wrapped in a thick woolen blanket. Her face, one of her ears and part of her shoulder were damaged by a lightning strike that occurred after her death. Her head was lifted high, and she was facing southwest. It is believed that her skull had been intentionally elongated. The Llullaillaco boy was about 7 years old when he was sacrificed. He was wearing a gray tunic, a silver bracelet and leather shoes, and had been wrapped in a red and brown blanket. A woolen sling was wrapped around his head. Slings were used by men in a ritual activity to launch stones into the lagoons at the end of the dry season to hasten the coming of the rains. He was the only child to be tied up and lying in the fetal position. It is believed that he had been tightly wrapped since some of his ribs and pelvis were dislocated, apparently died under stress. Since vomit and blood were found on his clothing, there also appeared to be an infestation of nits in his hair. He was also buried with a collection of small objects, some of them depicting finely dressed men driving caravans of llamas. Similarly to the Lightning Girl, his skull had been slightly elongated. Due to the fact in which he was tied up, it is believed that he may have died of suffocation. According to study, the children had been drugged before the start of the sacrifice. They were sedated by the coca leaf and corn beer combined with frigid, high-altitude settings that may explain how the children were killed. There were no traces of direct violence. The finding is based on detailed analyses of hair taken from the more than 500-year-old mummified remains. John Verano, an anthropologist, told NBC News, "The corn beer chicha and coca leaf, the plant that contains cocaine, are prominent features of Andean culture, so finding their signature is not a surprise in itself. But it is particularly interesting the level of detail at which the researchers are able to look at it," he added. "It allows them to hypothesize why the older child of the 3 was drinking so much chicha in her last month of life, and what that might have indicated about her lifestyle and activities." The children chosen for sacrifice in a Capacocha ceremony were typically given alcohol and coca leaves and deposited at the place of the ceremony. Capacocha ceremonies were undertaken to stop natural disasters performed as major festivals or processions at important ceremonial sites. The rationale for this type of sacrificial rite has typically been understood as the Inca trying to ensure that humanity's best were sent to join their deities. Today, the mummies reside in the Museum of High-Altitude Archaeology, a museum dedicated entirely to the display of the mummies, in Salta, Argentina. To prevent deterioration, a computer-controlled climate system maintains environmental conditions similar to those on Llullaillaco. Andrew Wilson, forensic and archaeological expert of the University of Bradford, told the National Geographic, "In terms of mummies that are known around the world, in my opinion, she has to be the best preserved of any of the mummies that I'm aware of. She looks almost as if she's just fallen asleep. I suppose that's what makes this all the more chilling." Andrew Wilson added, "This isn't a desiccated mummy or a set of bones. This is a person. This is a child, and this data that we've generated in our studies is really pointing to some poignant messages about her final months and years. For me, it's almost like the children are able to reach out to us to tell us their own stories," he said. Hair, especially, is such a personal thing, and here, it's able to provide some compelling evidence and tell us a very personal story even after 5 centuries.